Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Marin and here you will find a little beauty, a little books, and a little teaching content. So if that sounds like something you might enjoy, I would love for you to subscribe and stick around and join me in my little corner of YouTube. Today's video is going to be my December reading recap, where I am also going to wrap up all of my 2022 reading stats and give you my top 10 of the year. So let's go ahead and get into the video. So I'm going to go ahead and start off just by giving you a list of all of the books that I read during the month of December. I am going to rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. I am not going to give you synopses right now. I will go back and do that in a couple of minutes when I talk about my favorite of the month and my least favorite of the month. So here's the ranking. There were 11 books total. So coming in at number 11 was Unthinkable by Nancy Werlin. This was her third and final book in her Impossible series, and I actually DNF'd this one. At number 10 is the 12th Nancy Drew book by Carolyn Keene, which is The Message in the Hollow Oak, which I gave 2 stars. At number 9 is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, which I gave 3 stars, and I vlogged. I will link that vlog up above and in the description box if you would like to check that out. Coming in at number 8 is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden, which I also gave 3 stars, and I also vlogged in this same vlog as The Last Unicorn, so you can check that out. At number 7 is Happily Ever After by Kiera Cass. This is a collection of her Selection series novellas, which I gave 3 stars. At number 6 is The Hollow Heart by Marie Rutkoski. I gave this 3 stars as well. Coming in at number 5 is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which I gave 4 stars. I vlogged this book as well, so check that out above. At number 4 is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow, which I also gave 4 stars. At number 3 is Opal by Maggie Stiefvater. This is book 4.5 in her Raven Cycle series. I gave this one 4 stars. Just finished it today, actually. Coming in at number 2 is My Life Next Door by Huntley Fitzpatrick, which I also gave 4 stars. And at number 1 is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, which I gave 5 stars. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk about a few of these books, especially the ones that I did not vlog, because if you want full spoilery thoughts, not really spoilery, but full thoughts, full well thought out thoughts on the books that I vlogged, please do check those vlogs out because I don't want to repeat a lot of that here. I don't want this to be terribly repetitive or terribly long considering everything I'm trying to cram into this video. But I'm going to go ahead and talk very briefly about the book that I did DNF this month, which is Unthinkable by Nancy Werlin. This is a fairy series. I read the first book years and years ago, probably 2012, I believe is when the first book came out, and I really, really loved that book. I gave it 5 stars, but I waited entirely too long, I think, to read the remaining books in the series because I didn't like either one of those two nearly as well. I absolutely slogged my way through the second book, which was extraordinary. I talked a little bit about this, I believe, in a vlog, so I'm not going to go into that right here. It was just very slow, and I didn't really love the writing or the characters. When I started book 3, I had higher hopes because we were going to be focusing on new characters, going back a little bit more to the first book as like a direct sequel to that, and I thought I would like it better, but I gave it 20%, I think, and it was the same slogging, slow pace. I just was not finding myself engaged at all in the story, was not connecting with the main character, Fenella, so I just decided I was going to DNF rather than continue to like struggle through the book and then rank it very low. So that is the DNF. And then I am also going to chat very briefly about 3 books that I did enjoy. So I mentioned I read The House in the Cerulean Sea. I did a whole vlog on this. I did not love this as much as everybody else seems to, which is not to say I didn't like it. It just took me a very long time to become invested in the story, and as such, I'm giving it 4 stars. I liked the ending. It made me cry, but it wasn't a 5-star book for me. Same thing with The 10,000 Doors of January. I did really enjoy this one. I also gave this one 4 stars, as I mentioned, but this was not as good, in my opinion, as The Once and Future Witches, which I read last year and gave 5 stars. This one never really evoked a lot of emotion in me, so while I found myself engaged in the story, I was not emotionally invested, and that is not a 5-star book in my opinion. So if I can't really emotionally connect with the characters, I can't give the book 5 stars. So that's kind of just a little thought on that one. My top book of the month, however, was Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This is a nonfiction book. It is the definitive history of racist ideas in America, and I really, really enjoyed this one. This is told from the viewpoints of 5 different people, and he basically covers the very beginning of the United States, and he follows it all the way through Obama's presidency, because this book was published in 2016. So it was just a very in-depth, very interesting look at where racist ideas came from. He does it in a very unbiased way. He's just giving you very blatant facts that you can easily look back and see that he's telling you the truth. And I just found this a very easily readable book. He uses language that's very easily digestible, and I really, really enjoyed this one. So I would highly recommend this one to anyone. And even though it's chunky, the audiobook was extremely well done, and I really, really enjoyed reading this, and I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. So let's go ahead and talk some stats for December specifically, and then I will get into like 2022 stats. So in December, I completed 4 series. I read 3 ebooks, 3 mixed media books, so that's a combo of either physical and audio or ebook and audio. I read 4 audiobooks, so they were completely read via audiobook, and I read 1 physical book for a total of 11 books and a total of 3,418 pages. So pretty darn good, considering that December tends to be a very stressful month. If you are a teacher, it's a little rough as you head into winter break. So I'm very excited that I managed to get all of this reading done. I did a good number of vlogs as well. So again, those are all linked below. Please do check those out if you want more specifics on some of the books that I mentioned. So now we're gonna go ahead and get into my 2022 reading stats. So I have basically compiled this list via the Cawpile spreadsheet that G at Book Roast created. That's what I used this year. I did not use her rating system. I just used all of the tracking information. So in 2022, I read a total of 118 books. I DNF'd 7 books, which I did count in that total, and that comes out to a total of 36,723 pages read. I am super impressed with myself. This is the highest number of books I have ever read in a year, so go me. This breaks down to a total of 40 physical books, 23 ebooks, 37 audiobooks, and 18 mixed media. Again, that's either physical and audio or ebook and audio combined. I read 104 novel-length books that are classified as novels. The rest were novellas and things like that. I read a total of 13 different genres. So my top 5 were fantasy. I read 21 fantasy books, which surprises me because I don't consider myself like a huge fantasy fan, but go figure. I read 18 historical fiction books, 17 contemporary books, 14 thrillers, and 13 paranormal books. So those were my top 5 genres read. The paranormal kind of surprises me too, but I was trying to finish up a bunch of series that classify as paranormal, so that's where that comes in. In terms of the audience for the books, 53 were young adult books, 44 were adult books, 14 were children's books because I was rereading the Nancy Drew series, and 5 were middle grades. 17.8% of the books that I read were published in 2022, which also surprised me a little bit, but I think that is because I was reading all of the Literally Dead book club picks this year, and I think every one of those was published in 2022. Don't quote me, but I think that is the case, so that kind of inflated that number a little bit. I read 50 books with LGBTQIA+ representation, and I read 44 books with disability representation. In this, I classified mental health representation as well because she did not have like a separate column for that. 10 of my 118 books were rereads. Most of them were Nancy Drew books. And I read 61 series books and 57 standalone books. I was trying to like balance that out towards the end of the year, but then I just gave up and just read what I needed to read, regardless of how that would work out. But it would have been kind of cool to have that evenly split down the middle, but maybe I can work towards that next year. Now, only 14.4% of my books were written by BIPOC authors, so I do want to do a better job of paying more attention to that next year. I was really working on trying to get through a lot of the books that had been hanging around on my want to read list for a very long time, and the majority of those were written by white authors, so that is why that number is so low. I was trying to finish a lot of the series that I'd started like 10 years ago, and that's just kind of how that shook out. It kind of shows you that the prominent series that were written back in the day in 2012 were almost all written by white authors, or at least the ones that got the attention, which is why it caught my attention, were written by white authors. So definitely want to do a better job of increasing that number in 2023. And finally, let's get into the most read authors for me. I did read from 91 different authors this year. 12 of the books were written by Carolyn Keene, because again, I was reading a Nancy Drew book each month. 3 books were written by Kiera, because I was trying to finish up her selection series. And 3 were written by Marie Rutkoski, because again, I had some series books on there, and I also read her adult debut this year, which I did not like that much, but we'll just leave it at that. Now let's go ahead and move into my favorites of 2022, and I did have a total of 15 5-star reads in 2022, so pretty darn good. I read 118 books, so I would have hoped for more than that, but this was an okay number, and I really did have some standouts this year. I am not going to list all of my 5-star reads. I have talked about all of these in various wrap-ups throughout the year. Instead, I'm going to give you my top 10 of the year, and that's how we're going to close this video out. I will say, I am not including nonfiction books on my top 10 of the year. I kind of think of nonfiction as something different. I did give most of the nonfiction that I read this year 5 stars, so just know that. I'll go ahead and list those off really quickly for you. So the 5-star nonfiction books that I read this year was a graphic novel collection called Brazen: Rebel Ladies Who Rocked the World. Here's the cover. I cannot remember the author because I'm afraid it's Penelope Bagu, something like that. She's French. The next one was Parkland: Birth of a Movement, which was written by Dave Cullen. This is talking all about the aftermath of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, not the shooting itself, just the aftermath of it, which I found very interesting and kind of a unique way to talk about a school shooting without talking about the actual shooting and giving the shooter any more attention. Then we had My Sergei, A Love Story by Ekaterina Gordieva. This talks about her relationship with her husband, Sergei Grinkov, who died very unexpectedly of a heart attack, and kind of their life before that happened, when they were not even necessarily friends, into their growing friendship, into their growing romance, and then ending with his very tragic death. So I really, really enjoyed that one. Definitely a tearjerker. Have your tissues ready. And then the last one, again, was Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. So those were the 4 nonfiction books that I gave 5 stars to. I did read one other nonfiction that I didn't like quite as much, so it's not on this list. Now let's go ahead and get into my top books of 2022. I'm going to start at number 10 and I'm going to go up to number 1, but these were all 5 stars. This is obviously subject to change. This is just how I'm feeling right now as I wrote this list out. So coming in at number 10 was The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. This was my very first book of the month book that I've ever gotten, and I really enjoyed it. It's historical, dual timelines. Really, really loved that one. At number 9 is Salt to the Sea by Ruda Sabides. This is a YA retelling of the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff, it's very hard to say, Wilhelm Gustloff ship during World War II. It was sunk by a Russian submarine, and it's following multiple POVs and just talking about their their attempt to flee from the Red Army. At number 8 was the second Aristotle and Dante book, which was Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. Again, this continues Aristotle and Dante's relationship and was really quite sad. Not as feel-good as the first one, but still very, very well written. I still stand by the fact that it perhaps did not need to be written, but it was a good sequel, so I can't complain too much. At number 7 is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is a middle grade book, one that I was not necessarily feeling was going to be 5 stars until it hit about the last quarter of the book. This is very much a story about grief, and it made me cry. So 5 stars just for that. At number 6 is The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. I read 2 books by Beth O'Leary this year. She's become a favorite author. Both of her last 2 books, the majority of people seem to not like as much, but I really loved The No-Show. Again, it's not necessarily a romance. It's talking a lot about grief, and I very much enjoyed how it was written, the story it was telling. I really, really liked that one. At number 5 is Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. This was the first book by that author I had ever read. I gave it 5 stars. I also read Yerba Buena by her, which I didn't like as much. Everything Leads to You is a YA romance, and it's a sapphic romance, and it just was very interestingly written. She has a very gorgeous writing style. It just pulled me in. I really felt connected to the characters, loved everything about it. At number 4 is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This is an adult thriller that follows 2 fathers whose sons were married. They are killed, and both fathers have a lot of guilt over how they treated their sons, and they both embark on this mission to figure out who's responsible for killing them and to bring those killers to justice. There's a lot of talk of racism, classism, everything in this book. It is very gritty, real writing. There are some hard things to read in there. There's some gore, a lot of violence, but it really worked for me. I know this is kind of a divisive book. Some people really didn't like it at all. Some people absolutely loved it. I am on the side of really, really loving it, and I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. Now we're into my top 3. At number 3 is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is one of the classics that I read this year, by far my favorite of the classics that I read this year. And I just really, really loved this. It was like a very feel-good story. Anne is very funny. She had me laughing out loud at her antics. And there's a lot of emotion and heartfelt, like very warm, heartfelt feelings in the book. I just really, really love this one. I do not know if I'm going to continue the series because I don't know that I'm necessarily interested in her life like after this book, but I did really love this one. Coming in at number 2 is From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zapata. Y'all, this is my kind of romance. Feisty, stubborn main character, slow burn romance, throw in some figure skating. This had me sold. I loved everything about this book. I found myself tearing up at Jasmine's inner monologue, particularly when she talked about her learning disability. That had me just absolutely tearing up on her behalf. That's probably the teacher in me, but you get what I'm saying. The slow burn romance between her and Ivan, oh my goodness, it was amazing. I loved watching them become friends and then finally become more. I loved everything about this book. I did vlog about this book in my figure skating vlog, so I'll link that up above if you want to check that out, but loved this book. Definitely going to read more by this author because this was amazing. And then we come to my top book, or rather books, plural, of the year, and those were the 2 books in Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot series. So the first one was A Psalm for the Wild Built, and the second was A Prayer for the Crown Shy. These were just such feel-good books. They put a smile on my face. They just left me feeling peaceful and warm and fuzzy. They were great, and they make me want to read more from Becky Chambers to see if her other books kind of leave me with that same cozy feeling. I just loved these books. I am not necessarily a huge sci-fi girl, but she might be making me change my mind a little bit, at least with her style of science fiction. So if you are not familiar, this follows Dex and a robot that Dex meets while Dex is out on their travels and their adventures and friendship, and it just made me feel really good, y'all. That's why it's at the top of the list. I could not recommend these books highly enough. They are both really short, quick reads, but it stayed with me for a very long time. I still smile when I think about it all these months later. By far my favorite books of the year. And those books are ones that will not change from that #1 spot. They were great. And there you have it, y'all. There is my December reading recap and my 2022 reading recap. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel if you would like to see more from me, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, everyone.